So we are more familiar now with Carbon Project, and we're going on with our second panel that shifts the focus to the consumer and society. The discussion will explore how flexibility solutions can complement traditional grid planning and what smart grids mean in terms of social and economic benefits. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Joining us is Guro Grøtterud, Chair of Market and Networks Committee and a member of Board of Directors at SmartEn. Here you go. Jan Kostevc, Team Leader Energy Infrastructure at the European Union Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, ACER. We have the first director of ACER joining us now, Mr. Alberto Pototchnig, currently Deputy Director for the World of Practice at the Florence School of Regulation. Marian Rusko, Chairman of the Board and CEO of the distribution company E.GD and Executive Managing Director of E.ON in Czech Republic. And we have Antony Zegers, Head of Innovation Section at ENTSO-E. It is great to see you. A warm welcome to all of you. And the conversation will be steered by Dušan Vlaisavljević from E.GD, an energy consulting and software company. With his experience in the energy sector consulting, he has prepared some great questions. So we are all really looking forward to the discussion. Here you go, Dušan.
Thank you. Okay. So good day to everyone and welcome to the second panel in which we will discuss the leveraging smart grid for the benefits of the consumers and the society. So we are living in very interesting times of the energy transition. So we are trying to achieve the sustainable clean energy future for Europe, but also do so with enabling the affordable electricity for the consumers and competitiveness of our industry. Across Europe, both transmission system operators and distribution system operators are faced with immense pressure to integrate large scale of the renewables, to facilitate electrification of the demand and do so without overbuilding the energy infrastructure. So the question is, can we leverage a bit more on the smart grids to make this process of the development of the smart grids and deployment of the flexibility options in relation to the traditional investment planning and decision making? So how we can align the processes of planning, the regulation, the policy measures, and also the functioning of the power system and energy market in a better way to facilitate the smart grid role. I would kindly start with Alberto. So if Alberto, I can kindly ask you to share your view. What are the main challenges that we are encountering and the key aspects that we need to consider when speaking about development of the smart grids and the deployment of the flexibility options?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, indeed, I was asked to set the scene a bit for this panel in 5 minutes, which is quite an impossible task. I diligently prepared some slides, but then I realized, listening to what was said beforehand, that most of the advantages, benefits, and also many of the challenges of smart grids and more generally of flexibility technologies have already been highlighted. And this is a conference or a summit of engineers. So I guess, in fact, I think I'm the only one who is not an engineer here, and deals with regulation. So I thought, as I said, the slides have been uploaded, I think, in the web page. I'm not going to use them, and fortunately, they're not even shown. Oh yes, they are. No, maybe not. Okay. Anyway, okay. So. No, what I would like to touch a bit the regulatory aspect, which is where I'm smart grids is only part of the flexibility challenge. Smart grids in themselves help in making the grid more flexible, but the system also can be made more flexible. So I think we have three challenges here. On the one hand, we have to make sure that we have a enabling regulatory framework to ensure that smart grids can be developed. At the moment, we've heard a lot about PCIs, etc., and CEF funding. I think CEF funding is only a small part of it. We cannot rely on financial support from European funds to develop the smart grids to the extent that are needed. So in an initial phase, probably CEF funding can play a big role, just also to help prove the concept. But in the longer term, we have to have a sustainable regulatory framework. And Jan and I have been working, ACER and the Florence School of Regulation, in thinking of something in this, and maybe we can come to that later on. These are the benefits, and then there is another one on on challenges. And here you see that there is both the regulatory challenge and also the high initial investment for smart grids. This is no different from any infrastructure project. There is a high initial investment, and infrastructure have been in networks, in energy networks, has been built since ever. Clearly, the scale of the challenge today is different, but in nature, the problem is not that different. We need a framework, a regulatory framework, which recognizes the challenge and which adapts to the new approach. The fact that we're not just looking at infrastructure, we're looking at smart infrastructure. But then, as I said, smart grids is only a part of it, and they would only do a small job if they were not able also to harness other elements of flexibility. And the two obvious ones, they've already been mentioned many times this morning: storage and demand response. Demand response has an enormous potential. Explicit demand response has some potential, implicit probably even larger potential. Implicit demand response and storage rests on prices reflecting the actual situation of the system, of resources and the grid. And we've seen so many times politicians and regulators, mostly politicians, intervening on prices when prices go too high. Why? Because energy needs to be affordable. It needs to be affordable, but prices doesn't need to be affordable. The bills need to be affordable. And therefore, I think we should start thinking about differentiated, the prices should give the right signal. The bills, if there is an affordability problem, and then we can spend the rest of the day talking about what affordability is, that's a different thing. It's on the bill, because this is what people cannot afford. They can afford prices, maybe not the bill. So that's one thing. The other thing is storage. It's new to an extent. In Florence, we've been helping 2 European member state ministries in trying to devise a support scheme for storage. As I said, it's new. There is very little experience in this. Actual prices would help. But then we have a long experience in supporting renewables, and we've learned how not to support them, at least. Maybe we not have the final recipe on how to support them in the best way, but at least we can use that experience in trying to find ways of supporting storage to the extent that it is needed, and to the extent that the market would not just make storage viable. This is a challenge. It's an urgent challenge, because if we need to expand renewables the way in which we want to do, and this morning we've heard probably upgrading already the 2030 targets. I think we need more storage, we need more demand response. Last part, one comment, explicit demand response, where consumers accept to be activated. Massive potentials even at residential level. I've seen numbers, in the order of probably 100 gigawatt of capacity that in Europe that can be activated. The problem is that consumers don't trust the sector. That's the problem. The energy sector is not the most loved among consumers. We have to find a way of improving the confidence of consumers, and then to try to make sure that they can help the system without getting too much bothered about it. Most people don't know what a kilowatt hour is, let alone what demand response is. So, but I'm sure that there is a way of using some household names which are familiar and trusted by consumers, and therefore in this way I think we need to think a bit out of the box and go beyond the energy sector. I think that's, and my duty was in the slides, by the way, and thank you very much.
Thank you for this comprehensive and excellent introduction to the topic. I would now like to hear a bit more of the TSO perspective and European planning perspective. So I would ask Antony on the ENTSO-E view, how they see the role of flexibility evolving in relation to the traditional grid reinforcement planning, and what are some of the good examples that ENTSO-E incorporates when conducting the planning activities and studies related to the pan-European electricity grid.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's a mouthful. So maybe trying to break this down. When talking about flexibility, obviously we think of demand and generation flexibility. At the same time, we need to think of, say, smart grid technologies or grid enhancing technologies, however we want to call them, which are part of the tool set of TSOs to make an optimal use of the existing infrastructure. So looking at the TSO level, I would say that it's very fair to say that the TSOs are constantly assessing or weighing off the typical grid reinforcement, grid investments with alternative solutions, being it, for example, phase shifting transformers, dynamic line rating, network topology reconfiguration, just to name a few. So it's definitely not the case that grid reinforcement like the go-to solution for any congestion. But of course, TSOs on the one side need to make sure that the network infrastructure is fit for the future, looking 20, 30, 40 years ahead. And at the same time, they need to make sure that they do whatever they can to make optimal use of this infrastructure. And then we're looking at smart grid technologies. Taking, let's say, one step further, looking at the European level, talking about flexibility and the use of, or say, grid investments, we have to look at the 10-year network development plan, of which I'm sure everybody already has heard at least. So it's basically looking at the future needs for the system, looking 10 years ahead, focusing on the cross-border infrastructure needs, and also their flexibility is part of the equation. So already when developing the scenarios in terms of demand and generation scenarios, the TSO input in terms of expected available demand side flexibility is taken into account. And when trying to optimize the model, so the future grid needs, focusing on the cross-border needs, flexibility is also taking into account in terms of storage as a potential alternative for grid investment, as well as sector coupling. So looking at the gas sector and the hydrogen sector as a way to get flexibility into this exercise of the 10-year network development plan. So all in all, there are different aspects to this question, but both on a member state level, or say bidding zone level, as well as on the European level, we're looking at flexibility options. For sure, we will need more of those for the years to come.
Thank you, Antony. So after the planning and investment, we need to assure that the assets and smart solutions that we developed are put in a proper way in operation. So there are a lot of challenges there when we speak about the coordination between the TSO, DSO, between different TSOs across borders. So I would kindly ask Jan to maybe share some views of the examples and challenges that we faced when we're speaking about operational usage of grid enhancement technologies, for example, and what are the regulatory and policy measures that could ensure the smoother transition and efficient usage of smart grid solutions.
Thanks. Quite a complex question, I think. Maybe if one would have it in front, would be maybe easier to answer. But first, to start with this, that regulatory frameworks should be there to allow and to sort of incentivize the efficient usage of infrastructure. Of course, smart grid goes in that direction. So you first need, I mean, I wouldn't be here judging if smart grids are used efficiently, because smart grids are efficient usages by definition. In I would say 99% of cases, maybe there is an outlier here and there. So you need to have regulatory frameworks which are technology neutral. And I think, or solution neutral, let's call it like this. I think this is, at least from our perspective, one of the biggest issues right now, because historically, this never needed to be the case. 10, 20 and more years ago, you didn't have grid enhancing technologies, at least not on par with what we have now with digitalization and so on. So the only investment was the investment into classical infrastructure. And the frameworks, the regulatory frameworks, are developed based on that. So basically what they're doing is remunerating costs of that infrastructure. Now, if you want to make it efficient, I mean, this by definition is not efficient, because you're actually incentivizing gold plating. I'm sure that the TSOs don't like that term, but this is basically, at least in theory, what you're doing, right? If you're saying we'll remunerate you for any costs that you need to have for the grid investment, plus of course some extra on top, that is not triggering more efficient use of infrastructure. So from the business perspective, the assets are not growing, so the asset base is not growing. You know, it's potentially even reducing if you're investing into smart grid solutions. And the other one is operational perspective. Operational perspective, I often say that it's sort of like a shot in the leg or whatever, the foot of the TSO. Again, on paper, I know that there are many TSOs doing it, even if they're shooting themselves in the foot, by investing into smart grids. Why? Because you're pushing yourself higher and higher on the stress level of the system itself. So you're using the system more and more efficiently, meaning that you're close to the actual physical limits of the system. Means more stress for system operation. Of course, challenges that we have now are also a bit different to the ones that we had 10 and 20 years ago, and these are even more pushing. We have to become smarter. We have to be, efficient and all that. But so the underlying problem, which I think needs to be primarily solved, is the regulatory frameworks themselves. I'm not pointing the finger here at the TSOs or the DSOs for that matter. I'm pointing the finger rather at the regulators and the policymakers. It's not that I see the policymakers stepping in. This is something we definitely dislike and saying, you have to do this and that like that. It's the regulators who have to create the frameworks in a meaningful way, of course, together with the system operators, listening to the system operators and so on, and create a neutral playing field. And one of the solutions, of course, is let's stop looking at the costs and let's stop remunerating just the costs of the investment. Because if you remunerate the costs, then you will always trigger investments into higher, more costly solutions, which again also solve the shot in the leg issue, because, well, if you build more lines, system operation tends to be a bit more relaxed if then compared to having less lines than that. So again, regulators need to step up, produce frameworks which really incentivize and create a technology neutral environment, in which I think the system operators, of course, it's going to take some time to have this mindset change, but I believe that the system operators will adapt and become much more efficient. And I agree with what was said before, that CEF, of course, can be the initial trigger, but the actual income has to come, of course, from the consumers, and the consumers have to feel the benefit. I think this is one very important aspect of all of this, right? And I think the title of this panel is something to do with benefiting the society and the consumers. And I mean, for them, it's not really beneficial if they just hear that, the grid is becoming smarter. Who cares? I mean, on the consumer level, really, who cares? People in the room, of course, care. But consumers do not care that it's smarter, that there is some extra smart technology there used by the system operators and so on. No. Is the bill getting down? Is the bill cheaper because of that? That's what they care. Is the system more resilient? Will they have electricity? Will the number of blackouts reduce and so on? That's what they care about. So this is what we also have to show through this. Thanks.
Thank you, Jan. I fully agree. What we heard also from Alberto in introductory part is that the highest untapped potential for the flexibility is at the DSO side. So I will now like to proceed with Guro and Marian to give their perspective on what are the main challenges to integrated flexibility into operation at the DSO level. What are the risks the DSOs are facing when developing certain initiatives, and how we can make this process go even faster. So ladies first, Guro, then Marian.
So thank you for the question. I think that we were still now talking about how can we start to use flexibility, and you talked about incentives. In the clean energy package, the DSOs are to prefer market-based procurement of flexibility, investigate this before investing. And the NRAs should provide incentives for this. Clean energy package ended into force in 2019, and we're still here. So something needs to be done very clearly. Now, one thing which I'm very happy to see in the network code that is now under consultation is that the responsibility for setting up markets is now clearly assigned to DSOs, which at least clarifies a problem which I've seen at least in some member states. I've seen in Sweden actually, DSOs saying that we can't buy flexibility because there's no market. Okay, now we know who to blame if there is no market. Now that's on the more general stage. Now, when you look to the projects that have been set up, there have been lots of projects and pilots in Europe. What they often struggle with is liquidity. My experience is that very often the system operator will start with defining their needs. It's a good place to start. But then they just focus on their needs. And when you set up a market, you have to understand what are the needs for those who are to provide this flexibility. And what do the flexibility service providers need? They need visibility. They need time to adapt their services and their business models. They need product design that are compatible with their technology and business models. And they need sufficient activation. Because what I have the impression that system operators often underestimate is the cost of a flexibility service provider to enter this market, to develop the interfaces, to develop the business plans, etc. In addition to this, they do often underestimate the fact that in order to enter a local flex market, very often you have to step out of another market, very often the balancing market. So you have the cost of entrance, but then you also have the cost of lost opportunity from the balancing market. And that is something that is totally underestimated in the projects. So I think that they need to work more together with the FSPs and have more time to develop, to understand, and take into account the learnings. Thank you.
Thank you, Guro.
I think, first of all, thanks for having me. Thanks for invitation. And I think it is important just to say how important it is to discuss all that issue from the DSO's perspective, because the energy transition mainly, as we know, decarbonization, digitalization, decentralization, and also electrification is happening within DSOs mainly. So all the PVs, or many of the PVs, also onshore wind, batteries and so on, charging stations on the customer side are connected into the grid, mainly into the distribution grid. And there is really the crucial question also how we bring the customers more into the energy market, just to play an active role in this. Because they are not pure consumers, as in the past, consuming the electricity flowing into their houses, but it's also about being active in terms of producing the own energy, but also sharing the own energy or store it or provide the flexibility to the market. And there is a question, what can we do as DSOs just to enable the customers to take part on this market? And I think there are two parts we can enable, and there is another part we can also use all that within the DSOs, because we will need to balance our grid on the regional level, not only on the TSO level, more and more as more and more of these equipments will be connected into our grid. So the enabling part, we will still have to invest into copper, just to be able really just to connect all the customers, to cover all the requests from the customers. So it will be a lot about the copper, just believe me. Smartification as well. And in the special case of enabling our customers, it will be about data. So it will be about how to collect the data, how to store the data, but especially how to evaluate the data, and are we able to predict what's going on in our grid more precisely as today. And for example, in Czech Republic, we established a data hub, which is a common company of the DSOs and the TSO. And it is a data hub collecting all the necessary data for the customers when they are sharing the energy, when they are providing flexibility to the market, when they are aggregating flexibility, accumulation, and so on and so forth. So you need data. So this is a part of a DSO. And the last, it's also a hard discussion. We are back in the regulation. It's also about tariffs. Are we, for example, with dynamic tariffs, are we enabling also demand side management or demand side possibilities to react? Where we can use, especially the flexibility as a DSO, first of all, is congestion management. Yeah. Is there a possibility, because we don't have congestion normally 365 days a year. If we would have, it would be a problem. But nevertheless, for some hours within the year, we can use this flexibility and the flexibility market as well. And of course, for balancing of our grid. So this is also the possibility how to overcome. And then this is a question. It might be also cheaper just to use the flexibility than to invest into our grid for a long time, being used only for a few hours a year. So this is also a big opportunity for us just to stabilize the cost or even to decrease the cost.
Excellent, thank you. I would also like to build upon what you mentioned on several aspects. The first one is related to the coordination between the TSO, DSO, and data exchange. And if I can ask you or Guro to comment also, do you think that coordination platforms, data exchange, and common markets are emerging sufficiently enough that the decision and that are made by TSO or DSO does not interfere, and that there are clear signals, what we heard for the market participants, how they should co-optimize their behavior across different market segments? So for this second group of questions, you can provide just short answers because we are a bit short on time, but just this is a very interesting topic and multi-layer.
Okay. Would you like to start, ladies first? No, I think in the terms of knowing what's going on the distribution side and the TSO side, we need more interconnection. And it happens ideally via data, just that we are really knowing what's going on. and evaluating the data which are available. Therefore, I think to have a common data platforms to be able really not only to know what's going on within our grids, but also going on in different DSOs, what's going on the customer side, to predict the consumption. I think this is very important, not only for us on the DSO side, but also for the TSO, and vice versa. It's the same. Therefore, I think it will be in the future a lot about data and how to exchange the data and how to have a common platforms where to share the data.
Yeah, definitely data sharing is essential, but it's not the only thing. In order to co-optimize, as you say, at least from the individual point of view, now I'm not sure that we need to co-optimize all the markets together, but we need to allow, it's a question of market design. The network code on demand response mentions the possibility for DSOs to forward bids from their market into other markets, such as balancing market. I see no reason why this should not be mandatory, given, of course, that the products are compatible and subject to CBA, probably. This market coordination by product design and by making it mandatory to facilitate sharing of liquidity is really key to keep the liquidity, especially in the lower grid, so that it's available for the DSOs, and also to maximize the profitability for FSPs, because if they're not profitable, they're just out of the market. One other point, one thing that would be crucial to facilitate this is to have product design not only on national level, but also a higher level standardized product design for local flexibility on European level, so that you can ensure the compatibility with the balancing market. Thank you.
Thank you. This is quite important, like in the balancing platform, what Picasso Mari have brought is this standardization, easier portfolio optimization across boundaries, and I would like to reflect also on the regulatory and policy point here with Alberto and Jan on your view of what are the key aspects that we need to consider when we speak to accelerate the deployment of both grid enhancement technologies and demand side flexibility.
Very quickly. As I said before, Jan, we developed a possible approach to promote a green enhancing technology. It should be, as he said, solution neutral, but it tries to overcome this sort of so-called capex bias, where, I mean, he already explained basically what the problem is that the current regulatory framework sort of promotes investment in hardware. And once you overcome that problem, you say TSOs and DSOs need to deliver on specific targets. If they are able to do it at a lower cost, then we split the savings between the TSO and DSO as an incentive and consumers. And that is basically nothing different from incentive-based mechanism of a more traditional type, where if you beat the regulatory target, then you keep the difference. And this would be the same thing applied. Those who are interested, I think the report is published both on our and on their website. Two final comments. Many countries, even large countries in Europe, the deployment of smart meters is still lagging behind. Without smart meters, I don't know how you do demand response. This is still so. I mean, we're talking about and large countries. I'm not saying sort of pockets. And the other thing is, even now there is this dynamic price, fixed price. I think even fixed term, fixed price contract should have an element at the margin where consumers are exposed to the price. Otherwise, they wouldn't care. And they would have to go into explicit demand response, which some of them would not want to do. So I think this is also something that if there is another legislative package, it may be included.
Just to complement, so I would say it's a cost bias more than a capex bias. Of course, it's also a capex bias, but we have to, what I see often in Europe is, and this is why I always get triggered by the capex bias discussion, is that people tend to then say, okay, so we need to fix the capex bias. We need to introduce the fixed capex opex share and so on. That's the solution to the problem. We'll do that. Many have done it or are doing it. It is not the solution to the problem. So please, I mean, if anybody thinks of that, think twice, because smart grid solutions are low total cost solutions. And even if you have a FOX approach, you will still not have a comparable unit of costs versus a classical infrastructure solution. So the idea that Alberto was saying that we had, and I think it's already implemented in Italy and giving lots of benefits, and on its way to being implemented in Slovenia also, is benefit sharing. So not stop looking at costs, share the benefits of the project. So if anything, that would be the one that needs to be triggered and implemented in regulatory frameworks. But just one last thing here to mention, and here's where I see the policy also stepping in the policy level, is that all of these comes with some costs, right? It's not like, okay, now we're going to smart grid solutions, everything is going to become cheaper and so on. You have to also understand that regulators need to become equipped to handle this new framework. This will be a very demanding framework for most regulators to work on, because it's asking the regulators to all of a sudden not just look at the cost and say, yeah, benefits are bigger, so we'll give you the cost back. No, it's asking the regulators to look at the benefits and analyze them and determine exactly what these benefits will be and how to split them. This is many times more difficult than the current regulatory frameworks in that sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Jan. Marian?
Allow me just one issue. I think we are talking a lot about affordability, and we are talking a lot about the cost. And I am quite convinced that the cost will increase. Yeah. So this is for the given. And the big elephant in the room is electrification. If the electrification is not kicking in, all the tariffs, all the megawatt hour prices will increase. And this is also an issue that we shouldn't only concentrate on the investments, smartification and so on. It's important, by the way, but we should also support the electrification within the society. Otherwise, it will not work out.
I would like to take all of these team panelists. We are almost on time. I will check on Slido. Do we have some questions, or if there are some questions directly from the audience?
Yeah, okay. Just wait for the microphone so that everybody can hear you, please.
Yeah, hello, Andres Van from Operato. Sometimes we have the technology, but it's not being deployed. For instance, an example, grid forming inverters. So 8 years back, we studied them extensively in Migrate project. In these 8 years, we have been integrating a lot into our grids renewables, but grid forming inverters are still not here. Recently, Tesla issued a white paper advocating this technology. So my question is, do we really need big guns to foster adopting a new technology, or we can do this by ourselves, just by the regulation, for instance?
Alberto?
I'm of course defending the regulatory side here, saying that yes, it's all based on the regulatory frameworks. I wouldn't want to see any big guns being used in any way, and also it sort of implies sort of interfering with the free markets, right? At the end, I think the essence should be, again, solution neutrality. So if you have a solution which is performing the best in a sense of cost and also the output, then the framework should allow it to be taken. And that's the idea.
Thank you.
I guess it's a right time to wrap up. Thank you, Dušan. Thank you to the panelists. It was an extremely interesting exchange of ideas and knowledge. Thank you. And thank you also for mentioning the elephant in the room. It's good that we are aware of that. Thanks a lot.